Hey everybody. In this video, I'm going to be giving you my thoughts on Project Cars 2 after spending about 5 hours with it. As with its predecessor, Project Cars 2 is a very large game, containing a tremendous amount of content when you look at it in terms of cars, tracks, racing disciplines, and the multitude of settings that can be used to tweak the racing experience. It's therefore impossible for me to talk about the game holistically in the context of a short video after only having spent a few hours with it. But what I feel I can do is give you a bit of a comparison between how my initial experiences with this game went versus the time I spent with the first Project Cars. And there's a few key points that I really want to touch on here, one of which being that I think that on the whole, my experience with Project Cars 2 has been a bit more positive than my experience with the first game was. And I think there are a couple of different things in particular that really contribute to that feeling for me. One of which being that I feel as though the controls of the game, specifically the controls associated with playing the game on an Xbox One controller, are significantly better than they were in the previous game. That's not to say that the controls are perfect or ideal as far as I'm concerned by default, but I do think the default configuration for the Xbox One controller in this game is likely to be significantly more comfortable and pleasurable and desirable for a larger percentage of players. Additionally, I appreciate the improvements that have been made to the single player campaign in terms of allowing more options for how it can be pursued. Having 3 racing disciplines represented in the first tier is a nice addition, and also having some branching paths within the racing disciplines gives people some real genuine choice as to how they want to tackle the career mode that I feel was definitely absent from the previous game. Finally, and this is a bit of a subtle thing, I'd have to say that I'm generally much more pleased with the user interface and the way that information is organized and presented in Project Cars 2 versus the previous game. It has a much cleaner, more disciplined, more refined aesthetic that definitely speaks more to me. The other really key thing that I wanted to touch on in this video is to really try to explain what sort of game Project Cars 2 is. Because much like its predecessor, it falls into a sort of no man's land in between pure technical driving simulation and the sort of simcade experience that you might get from, say, a Forza or a Gran Turismo. And that's not to say that Project Cars 2 is incapable of duplicating or even surpassing the experience provided by the games at the edges of that gameplay spectrum. But it's more so to indicate that where the game's controls and simulation model and feel land by default rests somewhere in between what people might expect from other racing games. Of course, this game has a multitude of preferences that can be adjusted in a very granular fashion to provide pretty much exactly the sort of racing experience a player would like to have with it. The potential issue there being that it'll be necessary for players who are interested in experiencing the game in a way that's different from what it presents by default to really dig into those options, become familiar with them, and understand the implications of fiddling with them. And while the original Project Cars had many of the same options, I feel as though their ability to impact the game experience and the means by which they were accessed in the previous game were significantly diminished compared to what's present here. At the end of the day, I think Project Cars 2 is a game with a lot to offer for players who are interested in becoming deeply invested in it and learning and mastering its mechanics. This is definitely not what I would consider a pick up and play game, but that's not necessarily a bad thing. I think it's ultimately a matter of understanding exactly what you're buying into with Project Cars 2 and being okay with that as to whether or not this game is going to be a good and sensible purchase for a particular player. As always, if you have enjoyed this video, be sure to hit that like button. If you'd like to see more videos from me in the future, be sure to hit subscribe, and I will see you next time.